Thank you everyone for being here bright and early if you're on the West Coast, a little bit later for East Coasters and Central Coasters. But I'm so excited to introduce our first presenter for today, Amy Singh. Amy Singh is a senior broadband program specialist with the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. Her policy, stakeholder engagement, and grants administration work focuses on expanding broadband access, adoption, and digital skills in underserved and vulnerable communities. Prior to working with NIDA, Ms. Singh was a digital inclusion director for the city and county of San Francisco, where she developed one of the country's first local government digital inclusion initiatives. In that role, she also served on the first California State Broadband Task Force. She previously worked in philanthropy on digital inclusion and communications policy, and in the technology sector as a software engineer and project manager. Ms. Singh holds a Master of Science in Technology and Policy program from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and a Bachelor's of Science degree in Math and Physics from Brown University. From 2014 to 2016, she was a fellow and affiliate of the Berkman Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University. In 2017, Ms. Singh was awarded the Charles Benton Digital Equity Champion Award for her longstanding work on digital inclusion. So I am so excited to introduce Ms. Singh.
I am Amy Tun from the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, which is actually part of the U.S. Department of Commerce. And I'm so happy to be with you and share with you information about digital inclusion in general, but also about a really exciting grants program that we've been working on to promote digital equity in communities, specifically in minority communities. Next slide. Okay, a little information as well as some information about NTIA because it's a mouthful to say the full name. So we are actually, as I mentioned, part of the U.S. Department of Commerce, and we are part of for the executive branch of government, and our mandate is to help expand broadband access and adoption, expand the use and efficient use of federal spectrum, and as well as ensure that the internet remains a driver of continued innovation and economic growth. And particularly, our agency does a lot around privacy policy. Next slide, please. So we are very involved in the Biden administration's agenda to ensure that every American has access to affordable, reliable broadband, and even more so has the opportunities and the skills to participate fully. So while the title of the session is around broadband infrastructure, we do believe that technology is just a tool, and really what makes it important is how people are able to leverage and use the opportunities that that technology brings. So therefore, we have programs and funding that support devices and digital skills. We've been collaborating for a long time with states, tribal governments, with industry, other federal agencies, and actually local governments and regional efforts as well. And also we have our policy arm actually both works with Census to collect data about broadband use and technology use, as well as analyze data that is out there. Next slide. Okay, so as I mentioned, although the session is titled Equitable Infrastructure, we do believe that infrastructure is just a piece of a larger mission around digital inclusion. A lot of the discussions around broadband do focus on technology, and as you heard, I have an engineering background, but as I went through my career, I became much more interested in the use and how communities can really control and manage their own relationships in a way with technology, and that in the end, it's not just about building the networks. It's about actually empowering communities. So next slide. So what is digital inclusion? So digital inclusion ensures that individuals and communities have access to broadband connections, that they can actually afford these connections, that they have the devices that are appropriate to meet their needs, and different populations, different uses need different devices. I'll get to that a little later. And that they have the skills to not only consume technology or the results of technology, but also create their own technology and use technology to collaborate. So in the end, it's really the focus is around people and community, not just the tech itself. So next slide, please. So I just want to go through some statistics, and really that outlines some of the gaps that we see, the so-called digital divides. You can see in terms of oops, I think we might be missing some headings there. Okay, let's see. Actually, this slide, sorry, for some reason the heading is missing. This slide, this part, keep on going, refers to income. And there is actually almost, you can see that in terms of the lowest income group versus the highest income group, there's almost a let's say, 25% difference in terms of internet use at home. Again, my apologies, but the slide down here refers actually to race and ethnicity, and I'll actually quote some statistics since they're not showing up on the slide. That most notably that home use amongst Native Americans and Alaska Natives is about 24% less than that of non-Hispanic white communities. The African American communities and Hispanics fall in between, about 10 points lower than white communities, and about 12 points above Native communities. There is also a real disability divide in terms of about 20% delta between those who have a disability and those who don't, households who don't have a member with a disability. There's also a difference in terms of internet use in terms of urban and rural communities, as well as age, that elder, more senior populations show a much less lower usage of internet at home than the population at large. Next slide, please. Okay, so you can see some of these gaps more illustrated, and in terms of actually what people use internet for. Again, you can see the large number of households with children under 18 that have no computer at home or no broadband internet at home. This was really, the effect of this was really shown during the pandemic when so much schooling went to remote schooling. So this is an issue we had highlighted, those in the field, for many years before, as testing, as homework went online, but it really took the pandemic to make a lot of people realize really how much of an impediment to education that not having computer and internet was for academic success. You can see also that there's a real workforce gap. You know, again, almost all jobs, even working in fast food, or I was working when I was working in San Francisco, being a cleaner in a hotel. All of these things, jobs took online applications only, and so again, there's an assumption of what you need internet access for, but you really need it for everything nowadays. And then again, I highlighted the number of seniors with no broadband internet. Again, the pandemic really highlighted how this affects people, that people were having to do medical appointments online. They were often isolated in their homes, and that the only connections to their friends and family was also online. And so not having this tool had a huge effect on people, both their mental and physical health. Next slide, please. So what is digital empowerment? And I really want to emphasize that really, again, to bring this point up again, that technology and broadband access, computers, they're just tools and they're means to an end for all these goals that you have, I assume you have, for your community, whether it's health, building a skilled and workforce that can earn a living wage, whether it is around education, economic development, economic opportunity. And then the last two actually aren't as mentioned as much, around innovation and civic participation, but I just wanted to highlight that, that it's, again, people think about innovation and Silicon Valley, but really what we would like to promote, and what we're hoping to promote through some of our grants program, is really community-driven innovation. And there are plenty of examples of that haven't necessarily been highlighted in the same way in the media, but so much of the innovation around the use of technology and what we want to see in terms of people having control over over how technology is used, has to be driven by communities. And then also, again, as we've seen, like the whole political process, or being able to engage, for example, with local government, being able to do basic government access, basic government services, are really all being driven online. So these are all reasons, and that broadband is important. And I think actually these reasons will resonate more with communities than just like, we have to build a new network. So next slide. Okay, so I'd like to break down and look at different aspects of digital inclusion, because again, a lot of the focus, rightly so, is on broadband access and affordability, particularly in rural communities. This is a real gap, but in order for a person, an actual community to fully leverage and get the benefits of this access, they also need appropriate devices, technical help and support. We really saw this during the pandemic, but also, if any of you, like I have spent a lot of time with my parents trying to help them set up internet network at home, or access certain like their health portal online, that the help is really needed, and that a lot of this depends on informal social support rather than programs, and yet it is very, very necessary. And then also digital skills training. And when I talk about digital skills, there's a lot of talk about digital literacy, which is sort of basic skills to navigate online. But I would say that digital inclusion includes the whole expanse of skills, whether it's for basic skills, again, getting online, and that still is an issue, particularly with senior populations, but also to be able to have the skills to have a living wage job, to having what there was a Brookings report recently about what a middle skill job is needed, whether it's like a health technician or an assistant. That there's a whole vast array of digital skills needed. And then I'm also we're moving more and more towards making sure and ensuring that there's a more equitable and diverse innovation economy. So STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, cybersecurity, network technicians, who's going to deploy these networks, who are going to design these networks, for example, in tribal lands. All of these are part and parcel of the digital skills training piece. Okay, next slide. So I just want to highlight, just to give you some ideas and see if this resonates with you at all, what communities across the country are doing around some of these aspects. So they include broadband access and affordability. Yael will be speaking about some federal government initiatives to promote infrastructure deployment, particularly in rural areas where this continues to be a real issue. But even if you're not in a rural area, there is the federal government support, and there are examples out there of discount and subsidized broadband subscriptions. You may have heard of the FCC emergency broadband benefit. If you haven't, I'll try to put a link in, but that's something to really look at what the FCC is doing around subsidies for broadband access. Again, during the pandemic, but also for years before, a number of communities have been distributing mobile hotspots, deploying public Wi-Fi in underserved communities, whether this is in lower income areas, or we saw a lot during the pandemic in rural areas. They would counties would deploy these quote unquote cellular on wheels cows, or actually have Wi-Fi in a bus that could travel from place to place. And then public computer centers and libraries and workforce development centers have been part of this, I guess, part of the solution for a long time. Next slide, please. Okay, devices, again, we saw a lot of school-to-home laptop programs during the pandemic. This has been going on for a while, but these programs got accelerated. A number of communities are working with nonprofit as well as commercial refurbishers and building partnerships with corporations so that their computers, you know, when they do a refresh cycle, that those computers don't just get recycled, but they actually get refurbished and deployed in the communities. Again, part of the FCC and some other programs such as Comcast and some other ISPs offer some discounts and subsidies on computers. Libraries have been doing laptop lending. Yeah. Oh, and I want to highlight mobile computer labs, where there might be like a computer lab in a van or in a box that can be deployed in different places. So. Again, about technical help and support, we've seen a growth of tech support hotlines that go beyond what the provider might provide, or they might actually, somebody might get on the line with somebody with an ISP when they're trying to subscribe just to help them navigate. There might be language issues, there might be a misunderstanding or lack of understanding of the technology itself. One model I love is the digital connectors, digital navigators, where people in the community are actually trained to be ambassadors around technology. We see this a lot in public housing, as well as other sort of community-based organizations. And also, oftentimes they will run these community tech events where people can drop in, get their computers fixed, get their questions answered. Next slide, please. Okay, and then as I mentioned before, there's a whole array of digital skills and training. Oh, I want to highlight the importance of online safety and security, that we really regard this as basic digital literacy, with everything that has gone on and with predatory behavior out there. And then that workforce training, apprenticeships are also a big part of the whole spectrum of digital skills. Next slide, please. And so I think so one thing that we have done is we have some documents and we have some resources around both broadband planning and digital inclusion planning. And in fact, we see a lot of communities integrating both, particularly again in places that might be doing some infrastructure deployment. But it is a number of cities have developed a digital inclusion plan. I can write examples, and I think this is something that's ideal for a coalition to get together to develop as well. And since all of you have, you're all coalitions and you have such strong ties to the community, again, I can show some examples and think about how you might be developing a plan given both your existing programs, and hopefully what I've talked about has triggered, oh, I know that community group who's doing this kind of training, or I know the library's doing this, and then really coming together and documenting all these different programs. Even the act of documenting who's doing what can really help in terms of forging partnerships and developing an overall strategy for your community. All right. So really what our end goal is really digital empowerment in the community. Again, that people are actually empowered to use technology in ways that they choose, and that in ways that benefit their own lives. So that's being a full participant in the development, the testing, the use of technology. So that's my digital equity presentation. And I just want to go through just quickly some grant programs, but just a housekeeping issue. In terms of timing, Alexandra or Julius, how much time?
You have about 5 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So.
Okay, great. I will then, I'll say that these grant, next slide, we have a number of grant programs now, or several grant programs, two of which that were part of the Consolidated Appropriations Act, but right now only one is open. So I provided a lot of information in the slides, which will be distributed, but let me just give you a 5-minute introduction to this, and maybe during Q&A I can talk more about this. And all right, next slide. Okay, so the program that I'm most focused on right now is the Connecting Minority Communities pilot program. And this is a program that leverages partnerships and institutions of higher education. So historically Black colleges and universities, tribal colleges and universities, and other minority serving institutions to promote digital equity, both amongst their student body and in surrounding low-income communities. And then the main purposes of the grant is to subsidize broadband access, including building the capacity of broadband on campus, as well as providing equipment and devices to students, and also training IT personnel. Next slide, please. Okay, so you can see a broad array of the types of things that we're funding, and you can see that this aligns very closely to what we had said that a lot of communities are doing. again, the building the capacity of the institutions, but also building digital skills and amongst the community and providing computers and access to students as well as community. Next slide. And our overall goal are to expand education opportunities and remote learning, which I think has been a real, again, a real issue, not only on K through 12, but also for community colleges and other institutions to train and hire and build a more equitable IT workforce, and to therefore spur economic development. Next slide. And just to emphasize, and I think this will be the last slide before I pass it on. So who are the actual eligible recipients and the eligible applicants? They're HBCUs. So if you already work with HBCU, a tribal college or university, or what is sometimes less known, different minority serving institutions, including Hispanic serving institutions, Native American institutions that are not necessarily tribal universities, Asian American and Native American Pacific Islander, and predominantly Black institutions. And maybe during the Q&A, I can demo how we have a tool to help you all identify if the partners that you work with do fall in this category. And as I want to emphasize is that I think a lot of regional and local programs work with community colleges, and many community colleges, particularly in urban areas, are minority serving institutions as designated by the Department of Education. So during question and answer, I'm happy to answer more questions about this, but thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Amy. That was fantastic. And I'm sure there's going to be plenty of questions in Q&A regarding the Connecting Minority Communities grant program. So I am going to now introduce our next speaker, who is Edya Casa-Peralta. She is the Senior Policy Advisor in the Rural Utilities Service of the USDA. She is an attorney who has supported Indigenous and underrepresented communities in telecommunications matters. Most recently, she served as ACI project manager for Amrid, the only 100% tribally owned insurance provider in the United States, where she supported the company's effort to bring high-speed broadband to tribal nations, businesses, and communities. Prior to that, she was a fellow in the American Indian Law program at the University of Colorado Law School. Casa-Peralta also served for over 7 years with the Center for Rural Strategies, leading the Rural Broadband Policy Group, a national coalition of rural organizations advocating for high-speed, affordable broadband, and as author with the Daily Yonder, an online news service dedicated to rural issues. She received a bachelor's degree from Occidental College, a master's from Ohio University, and a Juris Doctor from the University of Colorado Law School. She's also very proud to be from Elsa, Texas, a small border town in the Rio Grande Valley area. All right, I'm gonna let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. It's a pleasure to be with everyone today. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you about our telecommunications programs. And I also want to mention that we are actually joined by Chris Mclean, who is the acting administrator for the Rural Utility Service. So he'll be joining us today in the conversation, and he'll be able to fill in any items that I left out and answer any of your questions as well. I'm Edya Casa-Peralta. I'm a senior policy advisor at the Rural Utility Service, which is an agency that sits within the Rural Development Mission Area at the Department of Agriculture. And some of you might be familiar with the Rural Development Mission Area, which is comprised of 3 agencies. It's the Rural Business Cooperative Service, the Rural Housing Service, and the Rural Utility Service. So even though our conversation is focused on broadband access and infrastructure, I encourage you to visit and learn about the other, our sister agencies in rural development, as they will likely have important programs that matter to your communities and to your organizations. Within rural utilities, oh, great. So we can go to the next slide. Rural Utilities Service is an agency, like I said, within USDA that is focused on funding infrastructure and infrastructure improvements in rural communities for water and waste treatment, electric power, and telecommunication services. So we focus on these three areas because we believe that these utilities are fundamental to improving and ensuring the quality of life of rural areas, of rural communities, and folk living on tribal lands as well. We can go next slide. So a bit overview of our telecommunications approach is that, as we mentioned, we have at USDA a unique mandate to focus on rural communities, right? So our telecommunications approach is laser focused on funding infrastructure, broadband infrastructure and broadband access in areas with a population of 20,000 people or less. What we do at USDA, at Rural Utility Service, is to fund the construction, the expansion, upgrade, and maintenance of infrastructure, of broadband networks. And we also have other programs that increase access to distance learning and telemedicine in rural communities and on tribal communities. Our funding types, we can go back. Our funding types are primarily loans, grants, and loan grant combinations. And just about everyone except an individual is eligible for our programs. However, there are programs that are better suited for some entities. We have, our programs are open to for-profit and nonprofit entities, to federally recognized tribes, to local governments, to ISPs, to municipalities, to cooperatives. So it really runs the gamut. And we can go to the next slide now. Thanks. And I want to highlight 4 specific programs at RUS for all of you. First is the Distance Learning and Telemedicine Grant Program, Community Connect Program, which I think are better suited to the communities that you work with. And I also do want to mention the Reconnect Program, which is specifically for internet service providers where they are starting or they are expanding, but is more about an entity that is ready to be an internet service provider in an area. They're going to sell internet service. And I also want to mention a special authority that we have to waive some requirements for areas that are considered to be substantially underserved tribal areas. And the next slide will be about DLT program. So our DLT program, for short, Distance Learning and Telemedicine, is a grant program that helps provide equipment to deliver telemedicine or distance learning in communities, in rural communities with a population of 20,000 people or less. This is a program that I think really allows a community to be creative in projects that could extend distance learning or telemedicine, right? You don't have to be, the project doesn't have to be in a safe community. It can connect patients with, healthcare providers in one community with patients in one other community, or you can connect students with instructors in a different area. So what we mean by distance learning is delivering interactive real-time curriculum via telecommunications service, connecting students and teachers at remote sites. And by telemedicine, we mean interactive real-time communications from medical professionals to patients or residents that want those services in other areas. These grants on DLT are typically smaller grants, but they do come with a 15% matching fund requirement. And like I said, eligible entities for these grants are nonprofits, for-profits, consortia, tribes, you name it, they're eligible for this grant program. Unfortunately, the grant program is currently closed. We just closed the round and we are we're preparing announcements of winners, but I wanted to flag it for you so that you can keep an eye out for the next time the program opens up. And you might want to encourage organizations or communities in your zone to apply to this. The next one is the Community Connect Grant Program. So our Community Connect program focuses on constructing and expanding broadband service in rural communities with a population of 20,000 people or less, where there is absolutely no service right now, where service does not currently exist. And that means service of 10 megabits down, 1 megabit up. This program actually must focus on a single community, whereas the DLT is for a project on distance learning, and it can be involved multiple areas. This Community Connect program has to be focused on a single rural community. And it also requires people to have, the applicant to have access to a community center. Because what this program does, it can allow the applicant or the community to provide broadband service free of charge in a community facility that is accessible to the public for 2 years. So you can use the funds to cover the cost of service in that community center. Say you have a health center, a community center, a small library, just a place where the community gathers and where the community could access internet service. That's precisely what this grant program can do. In addition to that, because we require there to be a community center attached to this program award, less than 10% of the grant amount, so a portion of the grant amount can be used to improve and expand the construction or acquisition of that community center, right? So what we think is, if it's really difficult for people to have internet access in their homes, identify a community center. We help you, pay the cost of providing service in that community center, and then people can access internet service free of charge for 2 years via this program. Again, this is a grant program, and it does come with a 15% matching fund requirement. And all the entities eligible are tribes, nonprofits, business, cooperatives, etc. Again, unfortunately, this program just currently closed. We're in the process of finalizing awards, but I wanted to flag it for you. So for when the next window opens of applications, you're ready and you encourage your communities and organizations to apply. The next program I want to highlight is the Reconnect program. This is a program that is one of the most popular programs we have right now, and is focused on building and expanding broadband networks in rural communities. And in the communities, actually, the area where the internet service provider, where the company or the entity, the utility is going to build internet service, the area that they select has to be at least 90% of the households have to be unserved with internet service. So this Reconnect program, if you think about the various ways our programs work, this would be a budding internet company or an established internet providing company that wants to expand, right? The previous programs we discussed, DLT and Community Connect, are more entry-level programs that are really well suited for a community that wants to be able to access internet, but they're not ready to be the internet provider, right? Reconnect is really for to level up a network for an applicant that is ready to be the internet provider for an area, or that they want to expand service in an area where they currently operate. So because of that, the Reconnect program provides loans. We do also provide grants, and we provide loan and grant combinations. If an applicant receives a grant via the Reconnect program, there's a 20% matching requirement. And there's a minimum of grant awards, of awards that can be given. That I'm not expressing that correctly. Any applicant has to request an award of $100,000 or more. So there's a minimum, a floor of how much you can request here, which is $100,000. But projects under Reconnect go for can request millions of dollars because they are building the infrastructure, right? They're the internet providers that are want to build that infrastructure. Again, eligible entities are federally recognized tribes, nonprofits, businesses, cooperatives, anyone who wants to take on that role in the community. And what's exciting about this program is that we are working currently on the round 3 of funding for Reconnect. We have held 2 rounds so far, and we will open the 3rd round soon. Hopefully in the next few weeks, we'll be able to share our announcement of funding availability for Reconnect. So the next slide should be about the substantially underserved trust area, which is a special authority that actually sits with the acting administrator right now of the Rural Utilities Service. This is an authority that allows the administrator to waive some application requirements for areas that are substantially underserved trust areas. The way this works is that if an applicant says, hey, I want a Community Connect award, but I can't do the 15% match, or I can't fulfill one of the requirements of the program, they can request the administrator in their application to say, our project is in a substantially underserved trust area. Our project, is in trust land, and we want you to consider our community area, our project, to be under substantially underserved trust area, so that you can waive a requirement that we think is really onerous for us to meet. So the applicant has to request consideration to be SUDA, substantially underserved trust area, in order to have the requirement waived. The administrator then analyzes whether it is a SUDA area and can choose to waive the requirement if the administrator determines that the project is in fact in a trust land with a high need for the benefits of the program. So we wanted to flag this because in a lot, we think in promise zone areas, there might be some trust lands that fit this characteristic and could benefit from this special authority that sits within the RUS administrator's office. I think the next slide is, that's what I thought. So I do have a couple of other things if there's a little bit of time to mention. I wanted to mention first that we have our structure at rural development is that we have state offices and we have area offices and we have a national office in DC. So we have a structure that puts general field representatives in your community, in your state. So if you want to learn more about our programs, or you want your organizations within your promise zone to learn more about our programs and begin to learn about the requirements, what the application process is like, you want to go to your state's general field representative, or GFR, right? That GFR is your front door to our rural development programs, and they'll be able to give you more detailed information as to deadlines, requirements, and help you think through the various programs of rural development that could work for your promise zone communities and area. The other thing I wanted to mention as well is that while at Rural Utility Service, we have programs that focus on rural broadband infrastructure and focus on broadband access, like telemedicine and distance learning. There are other programs within rural development, within our sister agencies, the Rural Business Development Grants, that can help applicants actually access some business trainings and some pre-requirements to be able to build broadband in your community. Specifically, I want to flag for you the Rural Business Development Grants at the Rural Business Cooperative Service at RBCS. These grants provide assistance and training for small and emerging rural businesses. And one way that we have seen applicants use the RVCS rural development grants is to apply for the grant with RVCS to do a feasibility study of whether in that region, the market in that region could support, or in that community could support broadband, a broadband providing service, a business, right? So you can do feasibility studies. If at some point you want to launch a rural, an internet service provider in your rural community, you can start by doing, requesting technical assistance grants, feasibility studies, or even like just thinking about the purchase of equipment that you would need for the business. And you can get some of that support at RVCS. What we like to do is, what we would love to do and see applicants do is take advantage of the support for their business that RVCS provides, amp up their business, get ready, and then come to RUS to build the infrastructure that expands that internet business, that internet provider business. So a brief example that I have is that, for example, the Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs Reservation in 2002 requested a Community Connect grant to build a small access network in the technology center at the reservation. So they came to Community Connect, said, we want to build access in this one center. We provided the grant, and they started providing access, free of cost in the community center. Then they realized maybe we want to build that into an internet providing, into an internet service provider. So let's explore that. So to explore that question, they went to the rural business development grants to see if there was a feasibility for establishing a tribally owned telecommunications company, and to begin to think about how to develop online entrepreneurial opportunities. So they went to RVCS for that. Then they came back to us, to Rural Utility Service, for, at the time, grants to help develop the Warm Springs Telecommunications Company. So I want you to think of our programs as well as building blocks within rural development that can help entities in your community, or towns, or tribal governments within your promise zone, to think about how to explore internet access, not just from the infrastructure, but from the business side of things, to be able to set up an internet service provider. So with that, I think you have my contact information, and I also want to offer a few minutes, if we have them, for Chris to share additional information from Rural Utility Service.
I just wanted to thank EdGL for a fantastic presentation. You're in very, very good hands. I have to leave at the top of the hour. But what we're doing in broadband at Rural Utility Service is really a continuation of our agency's legacy, going back to the Rural Electrification Administration, when Franklin Roosevelt created us in 1935 to bring power to the people. And we've I'll take an opportunity, given an extra advertisement. Not only do we do broadband, we do electric service. And one of the exciting things that's happening in the electric industry and finance is that smart grid, fiber-based smart grid, is synergistic and catalytic with communities' broadband needs. And we see a lot of opportunities there. Energy efficiency relies on communications connectivity, and we have a lot of direction and energy towards energy efficiency and decarbonization. So again, we thank you. And also I want to mention our water and sewer programs, because I know the promise zones, the opportunity zones all need basic infrastructure, and we're here to be able to help when it's in a rural area. So I apologize that I have to leave, but you're in excellent hands with EdGL. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for everyone's, for the presenters, Edja and Amy. We're going to now move into our Q&A session to give everyone the ability to kind of pose their questions now that we have both of these amazing, awesome presenters that are so knowledgeable in the broadband space and have a lot of different grant opportunities and funding opportunities that we can expand on. I'm going to stop my screen share. And it looks like we have a couple of questions in the chat. Here is one for us. This is a question from Michael Puck, and it is posed for Edgio. Which federal agencies does the USDA collaborate with for projects? And then could you provide a couple of examples of model projects funded?
Right. So when we say that our agencies collaborate on projects, what we mean is that we share, we keep each other appraised of the efforts that we have, but we don't necessarily jointly review one project together. So what I love about the information that Emmy, for example, provided is that I see that the programs at NTIA are great entry-level programs for communities interested in building their own broadband network. And then maybe there is a seed grant that they can access from NTIA. And when those communities are ready to level up their operations, they can come to RUS. So that's what we, I think, what we mean when we say collaboration is we're all as a federal family play a unique role in closing the digital divide, right? Like we're solely, USDA is focused on rural communities and funding projects in rural and tribal lands. And so we look forward to seeing the applicants that went to NTIA's programs also come to get funding to expand their work at USDA. And then maybe someday down the line that applicant says, listen, I want to be a fully regulated entity. I want to expand a network majorly. They can of course come to us, but if they're going to areas beyond 20,000 people, they're likely going to need FCC funding. And so then they can go to FCC programs, or they can sign up for the FCC's Lifeline program or the FCC's EBB program. And that way we are all collaborating to close the digital divide from the various vantage points that are necessary.
Similar to what Edgio said, because I saw the similar question for NTIA. So we do, in fact, one of the big initiatives of NTIA and also RUS was to collaborate on an interagency working group amongst a number of federal agencies. So actually, going back a number of years now, there was a recognition that digital inclusion and broadband was not just the job of a single agency, that actually these issues were part of everybody's mission, from, including, NTIA, that's the telecommunications information, that's our main mission, same with the FCC. However, whether it's RUS, USDA, whether it's Department of Education, whether it's HUD, and I won't steal Alexandra's thunder about HUD. She can make the announcement, the HUD Connect Home program, that really this is a factor in the success of programs across the whole federal agency. So we really are, we meet regularly to share information about each other's grants programs. For example, there's the rural, a lot of our programs not only focus on broadband use and deployment in rural areas, but particularly the skills training program is open to urban. Of course, Connect Home and HUD, that also has a whole different spectrum of communities per se. But again, there's this approach that really broadband and digital inclusion is part of the mission of all the different federal agencies.
Thank you for that. And just as some clarification on what the Connect Home program is, Connect Home is a public-private partnership along with public housing authorities and HUD and with community organizations that also work in the space of narrowing the digital divide. And while we're on the topic, there is actually another opportunity to learn about even more just work in the space of digital inclusion and broadband equity. And that is going to be the virtual summit happening in 2 weeks from October 4th to the 6th. There are lots of different sessions with plenty of incredible speakers that I highly encourage anyone who works in this or who are interested in this digital space to register for any session that you might find interesting. I'm going to drop in the chat for everybody here. But definitely look into that. There is another question on that we have as well for both Amy and Edya. Does the USDA or NTIA work with EDA?
Yes, both in the more within EDA is also part of the interagency working group, but we also have done a series of technical assistance workshops actually in regions with the EDA field offices where we have gone to, well, in the age of COVID, they've been online workshops, but beforehand, there were regional workshops actually on site where we actually did a number of presentations and a number of technical assistance sessions specifically on broadband planning, infrastructure planning, and we often actually did work with the our U.S. field offices as well. So particularly in terms of technical assistance, and then also informing our constituents of EDA grant opportunities. That's been how we've been mainly working with EDA.
Edja, do you have anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, I think as Emmy mentioned, we are part of this American Broadband Initiative, collaborative of all where all federal agencies discuss, our different roles and our programs in closing the digital divide. So in that regard, we also stay in touch with EDA, and Emmy has a more of a joint actual workshop collaboration. And so I would have to, I'll ask our staff if we also have those, and I'll mention them later.
And one thing I also want to mention, which is in the slide deck, and information that we actually maintain a database and an online resource that that actually lists the different federal broadband funding opportunities. So we actually have a collection where people can go to one-stop shop, so to speak, to actually look at federal funding opportunities around broadband infrastructure deployment, digital skills training. Actually, let's see, I think it might be easier to go. Okay, for me, maybe if I try to pull up the federal funding guide on my, let me see if I can do that and share. I'll see if I can share my screen. Let's see. Okay, federal funding. Okay, so this is. Am I able to share this? Let's see, share screen. And there, okay. All right, so as I said, the link and everything, I'll put it in the chat box, but also it's part of the presentation that we actually have this federal funding site that allows you to identify funding opportunities across the federal government around broadband planning, deployment, and digital inclusion. You can look at per agency. Let's see. So let's say because we're talking about, for example, all the different programs that were outlined today. Or not all, actually, there are a number of others. You can also look at it by recipient type. So if you wanted to look at, let me say any, but say you're a tribal government, you can look at the different opportunities. Or say you are actually looking for a particular topic. Let me see. All right. And looking for broadband adoption, digital literacy type funding. Who would fund this? So this is actually I should have mentioned this from the beginning. This is a big way we actually do collaborate with the different federal agencies, is that we collect data on a very regular basis. It used to be annually, but given all the grant programs, we're trying to be much more, the grant programs, we're trying to be much more current with all the grant programs that are happening on this topic. So. And they're different. So I really encourage you all to check out this tool. And then we also have a new feature that is an interactive tool, but I won't take the time to demo that right now. So that can help you identify different funding opportunities.
And anyone is also, if you have any questions, can raise your hand and I will unmute you. If you would rather pose your questions to the panelists that way as well. And you can also just submit it into our chat box. But I do actually have a question for you, Amy, regarding your Connecting Minority Communities program, and was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to the eligibility requirements or who is eligible. I know you spoke to it briefly in your presentation, but if you could maybe expand a little bit on the consortium.
Sure. So basically, again, our program is focused on the role of minority serving institutions and the role they play not only for their students, but also for their local communities. And so therefore, and just to explain that the whole designation of being a historically Black college or university or tribal college or university was legislatively mandated, and the Department of Education maintains a list. The list of other minority serving institutions, such as Hispanic serving institutions and predominantly Black institutions, Asian American serving institutions, is based on a couple of factors. One is the percentage of the population or the student body is a certain demographic. So, certain percentage of Latino students, an institution has to have that to be at what's called an HSI, Hispanic serving institution. Also, there has to be a certain level of need, i.e. there has to be a certain level of low income student population in order to be eligible. So that's the eligibility around the institution. But one feature of our program is that the institution itself, the university or college, can either just use the funding to serve its own needs. Say it wants to upgrade broadband in their dorm, in their dorms. They can use it for that, or they want to be able to distribute computers to all a community college wants to be able to distribute computers to all their students with a Wi-Fi hotspot to make sure that they can get classes online. They can use it for that purpose, but they can also do it to do certain community work, digital inclusion training work, helping subsidize and helping sign up people for the different broadband subsidies. However, we limit, there's a whole set of rules that say that we limit those that funding to a 15-mile radius of the institution that's applying. And that, again, it has to be the institution that actually leads the quote unquote consortium and actually does the application. And that the community, i.e. has to meet a certain low income threshold. So I think it's 250% of poverty. So there we have a whole document of rules on this, but actually we developed a tool to make this easier to identify who may qualify. And I'm going to cheat a little bit and go right to an example community. And let me share my screen again. Let me see. And I am going to go to, this is a tool that we've developed, a map basically that we have developed to help communities and institutions identify if they are eligible for this program or, and there is a caveat, potentially eligible, because there might be institutions listed here who are eligible based on like, say, there's a number of Asian American serving institutions that may be listed here because they have a certain threshold number of percentage of Asian American student population, but they might not meet the low income threshold. But I want to show an example of San Diego, where I know very well from work in California that I've done and such. They have quite an active digital equity community. And that I basically pulled up the Hispanic serving institutions located in California, and then from that you can get a list of who. Then I zoomed in, and you can get a list of all the. This shows a list of all the Hispanic serving institutions in California, or let me zoom out so you can see all of California. You can see more of California. So here you can see there are a number of Hispanic serving institutions in California, but again, since this is a regional, Promise Zones are a regional program, you can see that within the San Diego area, let's say, there are several institutions, including the San Diego City College, San Diego State University. These circles are basically radius around it. So let me just pull, and that these red areas are actually the low income areas, neighborhoods, where you would be eligible as a community organization, as a minority business enterprise, as a, as a collaborative, as a consortium to do work, to receive funding to do work in these areas. So, and I know this is a very high level, very quick demonstration, but we do have on our website a actual a recording of a webinar that goes into a lot of detail on how to utilize this tool. So let's say, okay, so I chose San Diego City College. So you can see there are a number of areas where community areas where you could receive funding to do digital equity work if, for example, you San Diego City College ended up being the lead applicant. And again, I'm not endorsing anyone. I just use this as an example. So, but I can also put a link to the webinars which show in more detail how to actually use this tool.
Thank you so much for going into that example. And I see that a hand is raised. Prasad, you're welcome to unmute yourself.
Yeah. Hi, Amy. Thanks for giving me the
Hi.
opportunity. I had a quick question for you. The map that you showed and the interactive way of how you filter various schools is just awesome. I just wondered if in that scope you also include K through 12 schools and communities. Is that in scope or out of scope? Because I think
Well-
you just mentioned colleges, so that's why I asked.
Yeah, so for this particular grant program, the focus is institution of higher learning. However, of course, Department of Ed has, well, actually for both the institutions of higher learning as well as K through 12. However, if they wanted, there might be an indirect opportunity where if a program with, for example, I'll just use community college, wanted to train parents and partner with the school district, there may be an indirect opportunity, but K through 12 is not the focus of this particular grants program.
Okay. Do you have any other grants that might fit what I'm describing?
I would strongly urge you to go to the broadband funding guide because there are a lot of, in fact, there are a lot more programs that focus on K through 12 throughout the federal government than do necessarily digital equity in the higher education space. I mean, they're both. So I will add the link and Department of Education, even a lot of the programs that FCC is rolling out in terms of broadband subsidies. Also the state of California, I think you said you were from Sacramento, even the city is working on this from what I know, but I know that the state itself has a big focus on this and actually a grants program run through the California PUC as well. And as well as this California Department of Education. So there's a lot of funding around this, especially after the pandemic. So
that's good to hear. Thank you.
Yeah.
And there is another question in the chat. And this question is, many devices, an example of this would be Chromebooks, used by a majority of schools and kids, need to be upgraded for the latest advances in cellular technology. What can NTIA or USDA do to accelerate or promote the ecosystem players to support this new spectrum?
Well, NTIA itself is more focused on government use of spectrum as well as sort of policy, including international spectrum policy, as well as sort of overarching policy. FCC does manage the commercial use of spectrum policy. However, they don't go down to the device level. So basically the scope of federal agencies also, for example, the National Institute of Standards and Technology is around setting standards and opening up parts of spectrum rather than sort of dictating or requiring devices to support specific features. So as long as they're up to follow the standards.
And I would say that you could look into our distance learning and telemedicine grants because distance learning is one of the components of that program. The grant funds can be used to acquire equipment, terminal and data equipment, computer hardware, network components, and software. So if there is a component of updating the equipment that is used for distance learning, that could be a good fit for the community connect grants. I'm sorry, for the digital learning and telemedicine grant program at USDA. And then, there is the limitation of it being in a rural area of 20,000 people or less.
Thank you so much for speaking to that. I do have another question here for you, and that is regarding some of relating to chromosomes and how a lot of chromosomes work with a number of different community-based organizations. And the question was, what are some of the opportunities available to like a number of organizations collaborating on any kind of projects that both the USDA and NTIA have. And if you welcome applications from groups of organizations, which is what a lot of these chromosomes work with.
Well, for the CMC program in particular, that is actually how we want people to implement their community work. Again, a school can apply on its own for its own work, but in the CMC program, the school has to be the head of or the lead of the consortium. But again, there are opportunities for things like not only other federal funding, but also state funding, and especially with getting funding out to the community organizations on the ground doing the actual work. I think most of these agencies do support collaborative and maybe working through an intermediary, whether it's a local foundation or it's a regional foundation or a organization or the city or the local government or something like that that can basically be able to handle and manage the funding as well as distribute the funding. So that's just as a strategy. And again, we've been very focused on these grant programs, but I just want to emphasize there are a lot of grant programs, especially those in California. California has some of the strongest funding, largest amounts of funding available for this type of work. So, but I also encourage you to reach out to your state broadband office. We also have a map for everyone. We maintain relationships with the state broadband offices across the country, and I'd say that they would be some of the first people to approach. Also, another highlight of a lot of the funding that's coming out is that a lot of the funding for broadband is going to states, who are then distributing it. Treasury just announced the program. So probably it's easiest for you to coordinate with your state broadband office and figure out, what's happening in order to figure out what's happening and what's most relevant to you. And I'll put that resource in the link chat as well.
Thank you so much for all of these resources that both of you have touched upon during our time together. I wanted to thank both of the presenters, Amy and Edja. It has been incredible having you and hosting you here at the National Coalition of Federal Convening. And I'm sure many folks out here in this we're really just appreciative of everything you've shared, and thank you again.